It is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. We are so very excited to be joined by Leilani Schweitzer. Most of us in this room have made a conscious decision to work in healthcare, not Leilani. Leilani did not choose a career in healthcare, it chose her. 10 years ago, Leilani's son Gabriel died after a series of medical mistakes. Now Leilani works in risk management at the same hospital where those errors occurred. In her work with Stanford Healthcare's risk management, Leilani uses her own experience with medical errors to navigate between the often insular, legal, and administrative sides of medical error and the intricate, emotional side of the patient and family experience. Her work with the Risk Authority gives her a unique view of the importance and complex realities of disclosure and transparency in healthcare. Leilani lives in Reno, Nevada with her daughter, and her TED Talk on transparency, compassion, and truth in medical errors has been viewed on YouTube more than 40,000 times. Please join me in welcoming Leilani Schweitzer.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. It's really a tremendous honor for me to have the opportunity to be on this stage with so many really leaders in this work that I believe so passionately about. And I'm very humbled by the opportunity to share my story with you tonight. So let's just go right to it. When my son was 20 months old, he died in one of the country's leading children's hospitals. On Wednesday, he was a joyful, cheerful toddler, and 5 days later, he was a corpse tethered to machines. Before he crashed, Gabriel's breathing and heartbeat were being carefully monitored. With the slightest little wiggle, the alarms would blare. Every time we would almost be asleep, the worry and the racket would begin again. We'd already spent sleepless days and nights in Reno, my hometown, in the hospital where Gabriel had been misdiagnosed over and over. But finally now, we were in Stanford. Finally here, I felt safe. I didn't think there was any place in the world where he could be better taken care of than where we were. And I was wiped out. And I'm sure the nurse, she could see how tired I was, and she wanted to take care of me too, so she did what seemed like the right and compassionate thing to do. She turned off the sound on the alarms next to his bed. And I thanked her when she did it. I remember that so very clearly, thanking her. Later, doctors and administrators told me that actually she had done a lot more. She had turned the alarms off everywhere, in the room next to his bed, on her pager, and on the nurse's station. And the manufacturers of the monitors later explained that they didn't think anyone would navigate through 7 screens to turn off the alarms, so they didn't bother to include a fail-safe that could have stopped her. They were wrong. So when Gabriel's heart stopped beating, there was no sound, just quiet. Nothing woke me until several minutes had passed. Then the nurse found him. Then I was jerked awake, and the room filled with people and panic. I think a lot about that nurse and wonder what it was like for her, how she remembers that night, how she felt when she walked in and saw the flat, glowing lines on the screen. What was it like for her to tell me goodbye, to look into my dazed eyes and know before I did that my life had been changed forever? And I wonder what it was like for her to go back to work, to walk back into the hospital, hoping, I guess she was probably desperately hoping, that nothing else would go wrong. I can only imagine the strength that it took for her to do this after she learned how vulnerable she was, how fragile the system was, and how easily it could fail her. I'm a healthcare outsider. I do not have a medical degree, and I have not spent hours in clinical rotations. I have fainted at the sight of blood on television. Really pathetic. I am absolutely certain that I could never undertake the difficult job that Gabriel's nurse once did, or the ones that many of you do now. Gabriel's story is my credential. It is my power and my influence. I tell it to make an impression, attempting to shift your thinking. This is the reason I tell it, because healthcare needs full truth. My outsider eyes see endless efforts to improve healthcare, to make us safer and to save us money. All worthy pursuits, to be sure. These come with heaps of good intentions, initiatives, checklists, surveys, studies, ideas, action plans. You all know the drill. Resulting in higher expectations with absolutely no tolerance for inaction. I believe that understanding patient and family perspectives is vitally important, but theirs are not the only ones that matter. I am skeptical that always putting patients at the center of healthcare's orbit will solve more problems than it creates. If one group is always at the center, others will always be at the periphery. This won't work. Patients and family stories alone create an incomplete truth, and half-truths do none of us any good. Only hearing Gabriel's and my experience invalidates the years of education, work, and dedication of his nurses and doctors. This tendency is myopic and dangerous and can lead to gross misunderstandings, like the alarm company neglecting to provide a fail-safe in their alarm system. They and their machine only responded to part of the truth. So where does improvement and change happen? Because right now, I believe we're stuck between the way we want things to be and the way they really are. Understanding both pieces is essential. We need our head in the clouds and our feet on the street. Pointing out problems and finding fault is easy. It's also usually not very helpful. The more challenging, and I argue urgent piece of this equation is to understand the entire environment that makes up healthcare. Looking for this truth may make us vulnerable. It may be discouraging. It will remind us that we are always prone to failure. And yet, it is our very best hope for making things better. About 25 years ago, when I was studying architecture in college, I learned to draw three-point perspectives. If any of you are architecture scholars, I know that this drawing is a two-point perspective, not a three, but please just keep that to yourself and go along with me. I used a drawing board, T-square, and many erasers. The process is complex, and often I lost my way. Essentially, this is a method to bend space, allowing us to see an object from three perspectives in a single drawing. This is what we need to do to understand our healthcare environment. We need to see multiple views at one time. We need to value everyone's perspective: patients, families, physicians, nurses, volunteers, administrators, the list goes on. There will be truths that we do not want to be told, like Gabriel's. They will make us feel exposed and point out things are worse than we may want to think and believe. We may learn our doctors are afraid and our nurses are overworked. We will be reminded that we are always at each other's mercy. All of these stories will not be profound. Hopefully, most will not be tragic. Listening may sometimes feel like a waste of time, but the importance may not be in the story, but in the power that it gives to the teller. Speaking up is vitally important for patients and families. We need to listen for every voice, not only the loudest and the ones that validate our own arguments. We need to hear about the doctor who spent 3 hours negotiating with the patient's insurance company, the nurse who was on her 4th 12-hour shift, who knows all of her tasks are being timed and measured. And we need to hear from the housekeeper who makes a couple bucks above minimum wage and is struggling to keep her children fed and the power on. These stories and the voices that tell them comprise the truth of the environment. Data by itself will never be enough. It is in the common ground of our overlapping stories where we will find opportunities for change. I've told Gabriel's story many times. Once, along with another woman who had lost her child, I spoke to a panel of physicians who worked at Stanford's pediatric ICU. Though the discussion was important and probably made an impact, it was not pleasant. I wondered if everyone was really there because of the lovely free lunch. When politeness allowed, the meeting ended. I pushed open the big, heavy door and walked into the hallway. There were 2 nurses there waiting for me. Both of them were crying. They remembered Gabriel from 8 years before. We had been in the PICU for less than 24 hours, but they remembered us, and they felt compelled to wait for me. What was so sad and demoralizing to me was that they were kept behind the big, heavy door. Why weren't they invited in? Why didn't they feel they could make themselves welcome? What could the physicians and I have learned from them? I believe a lot. Tradition and status need to stop keeping people outside of the room. We all need help, and we all are helpers, and we all have a story to tell. Gabriel died a long time ago. It happened in the same days that Hurricane Katrina was bashing into the Gulf. I've had time to process it. I've spent a lot of money on therapy. I ran a lot. I made art. I learned to snowboard. I went to Burning Man. It was okay. I've had the opportunity to heal. I'm fortunate to understand most of what happened to Gabriel because of a very simple reason. I was told. He died at a hospital that had people brave enough to face me and not be afraid of disclosure, bold enough to take responsibility. And because of this, I am one of the lucky ones. I think a lot about the people who have not had the same opportunity to know and understand. Mothers like Dale, for example. People who still have questions about what happened. Questions that after time have morphed into monsters. Huge, menacing, life-sucking monsters. These people are far from healing, and they need a lot more than a snowboard and a good therapist. They need the truth. This is one of the last photos I have of Gabriel, and that's him with his sister Sophia. She's going to turn 15 next week. If you could all remember me in your prayers, that would be great. 4 years ago, I started working with Stanford on their communication and resolution program, the process for early assessment and the resolution of loss. We call it PEARL. It works to take care of people when their care doesn't go as planned. It is complex, challenging work, and I am grateful for the opportunity to do it. Stanford goes to great effort to understand and explain what has happened in a patient's care. And over the past years, I have learned that the first telling, the first data, rarely tells us enough. It is only after careful listening and research do we come to know the big story, the truth of what happened, and what we can do to make things better in the future. I believe in transparency. People deserve the dignity of understanding all aspects of their medical care, especially the parts that did not go well. I recognize these explanations make us uncomfortable, reminding us we are vulnerable and imperfect. And I have been on both sides of those disclosure discussions. I know very well how painful, challenging, and exhausting they are. And yet, I am still baffled that telling the truth is considered revolutionary. Being honest is an innovative new idea. Really? We can and we should do a lot better. Disclosure and transparency should be the standard of care for responding to the unexpected in medical treatment. By disclosure and transparency, I mean being accountable and telling the truth. Transparency is not the view of an event from 30,000 feet above, where shapes are funny and details are impossible to see. Transparency isn't an explanation from the ground. It is look me in the eye and explain until I stop asking questions. Transparency is information democratized. Everyone has access, and everyone is heard. Hospitals being transparent after the unexpected happens should not be exceptional. It should be typical. Extending care to the people involved in errors should not be considered heroic. It should simply be done as a matter of decency and dignity. After Gabriel died, Stanford didn't hide behind legal maneuvers as they easily could have done. They could have gone silent, dismissed me, and hoped I couldn't gather my wits enough to file a lawsuit. And you know, they probably would have been right. Instead, they investigated, they explained, and they apologized. They made improvements to ensure that children at their hospital would be safer. When the weakness in the monitors was discovered, all other hospitals using the same equipment were alerted to the dangerous circumstance. Maybe that helped someone else. I will never know. But it still helps me now. I advocate for transparency because it helps us see the truth. It helps us find failures and fix them. Transparency is like a new lens. There was a time when our best and brightest minds believed the earth was the center of the universe. Now, because of a new lens, we smugly laugh at that as nonsense. New ways of seeing have made us smarter, but we still have a very long way to go. It would have been easy and typical for Stanford to look no further than Gabriel's nurse, blame, and fire her. But they recognized her story was one of many that mattered, and they looked to learn more. Turning off the alarms did not cause Gabriel's brain to herniate. A failed shunt, poor communication, and slow responses did. The night Gabriel died, his nurse asked for help. She knew he was not doing well and recognized he was in terrible pain. She knew to properly take care of him, she needed help. She asked for it, but she didn't get it. I wish she had been more insistent and didn't have to go it alone. I wish her vulnerability had been accepted and there had been a safety net to catch her and Gabriel and me. I wish Philips, the manufacturer of the monitors, had better understood the environments where they placed their machines. But they didn't. They didn't think anyone would go through the trouble of navigating through multiple screens. They ignored alarm fatigue and a skilled nurse's desire to take care of her patient and his mom. That narrow reading of the story put many people at risk. It failed us, and to this day, it pisses me off. Why didn't they design the monitors to be quiet at the bedside but alarm at the nurse's station and on her pager? Is that difficult? Maybe it is. Maybe I'm the one who is not seeing the whole story, but I am also certain that Phillips did not. After Gabriel crashed in the middle of the night, a neurosurgeon came to talk to me. He said, "The first 12 hours are critical." I wasn't sure what he meant, and I didn't really have the capacity to ask a lot of questions. After those hours had passed and nothing changed, he said, "The first 24 hours are critical." Now I understand he was doing his best to take care of me. Gabriel was not going to get better, and he knew it. He was waiting for me to comprehend what had happened. He was stalling, and it must have been hard for him. I remember very few of his exact words, but clearly remember tears running down his cheeks when he said them. His humanity and vulnerability made me feel less alone and a little less afraid. There was a young doctor taking care of Gabriel that night, too. She wouldn't stop talking to me. She was doing her very best to counsel and explain, but she was hopelessly unprepared for the situation. Awful for me and awful for her. Finally, I put my hand in front of her face just to get her to stop talking. Then everything stopped and the room was vacant. People didn't walk out the door. I believe they vaporized. A lot of damage was done in that moment. Broken hearts dispersed with no ointments or methods to heal them. Death is a full stop for the patient in the hospital bed, but it is only just a very terrible beginning for the people left in the room. Families, physicians, nurses, everyone should have care extended to them because these people, because the fallout from these events is slow, painful, and toxic. And it lasts long after a shift change, discharge, or death. This is my mom with Gabriel. It's probably was taken about maybe 6 weeks before he died. You might be wondering why I didn't sue. You may think I'm a chump. You all know how broken the system is. Maybe you think I naively missed an opportunity to be compensated for the loss of my son. But that never made any sense to me, and it still doesn't. Though I didn't at the time, now I see what a threat I posed to the hospital. Beautiful dead child, ornery mother, easy, obvious blame. Pretty much all the ingredients of a risk management PR nightmare summed up into one event. But again, that's not really the whole truth. When I was 7 months pregnant, I was told Gabriel probably wouldn't live to be born, and if he did, he would live briefly in a vegetative state. My daughter's pediatrician reviewed the diagnosis and said, "Here's the thing about kids. They don't read books, and they don't know when they aren't supposed to make it." That made me hopeful. Actually, it made me pretty ecstatic. His kindness and optimism essentially gave Gabriel to me. This same pediatrician did not recognize Gabriel's shunt was failing, and he would have been a target in any lawsuit. Same with the neurosurgeon who put the shunt into Gabriel's brain to treat the hydrocephalus, saving his life. He would have been a target as well. I couldn't sue the doctors in action and not punish their compassion. I couldn't punish them for taking Gabriel when they were the ones who had given him to me. Forget everything you may have learned in philosophy class. This is the truth of the human condition. People are not menus. We cannot order traits a la carte in each other. Human nature gives us what we want so much: kindness, compassion, and wisdom. And it gives us what we don't want at all: vulnerability, inaction, and confusion. We want a doctor's expertise and skill, but prefer to dismiss her frequent insomnia and anxiety about her med school debt. We want a nurse's efficiency, gentleness, and nurturing nature, but look past the expectations that are setting her on a path to burnout. Because we aren't menus, we can't have it both ways. And this is why we need to stop trying to protect patients from the big picture problems of healthcare. Expect more from us and hold us accountable. By keeping us from understanding, you are keeping your most motivated resources at bay. And frankly, you're insulting us. Patients and families are the most untapped resource in healthcare because we have so much to offer. And we have that to offer because we have so very, very much to gain. But we can't help if we don't see the whole truth. Sometimes maybe we need to be at the center of the story, but some other times we may need to step out of the center just to see what the big story is. We should always remember that we are always in each other's orbits. Every hospital could employ a person like me. I admit my bias. I feel like if you want to get something done, you should hire a mother. But you could ask Linda what she thinks about that. She probably has some thoughts. Every hospital has someone who has suffered something terrible and is looking to find meaning in their experience. There is absolutely nothing unique about me, but there is a lot unique about my situation. It was bold for Stanford to invite me to be part of their team, to invite and encourage my perspective, not just for a token visit as a reminder of the high stakes of healthcare. No, Stanford has given me an opportunity to be more than a reminder or a nuisance. They have given me the opportunity, now a career, to share what I have learned from the most challenging experience of my life. And all of you could do the same. I offer no action plans or research to you tonight, only some suggestions. Look relentlessly for new perspectives. Always be mindful of the whole environment. Invite everyone into the room. Reward curiosity, question the hierarchy, tell the truth. Hire a mother. Pay her real money. Find a way to hear yourself saying, "I never saw it that way before." Because this is how together we will find healthcare's whole truth. And one last thing. Take lots of pictures of the people you love because you will never have too many. Thank you.